Hey everybody, welcome back to the Spinner Rack. I'm here with my boys, the Cal and Petey. And today we're talking about Cobra Commander. Did you guys hear about the madness? They're doing a total reboot of Cobra Commander. So I'm bringing in my boys to talk a little bit more about that and get your opinions on it. As always, please comment, subscribe, give us a thumbs up if you like what you're seeing. So they're doing a new reboot on Cobra Commander, and what they want to do is they're changing the whole thing of who Cobra Commander is. I mean, they're clearly making him a little bit smarter. They're not making him the comic relief that they've done in the past, it looks like. Haven't seen the comic yet. This is just a word that we've been seeing out on in different venues. One of the things that they're doing is they're making him like a tech billionaire, gazillionaire, basically, who sells androids or his battle androids to different countries. And then at a particular time, he snaps them, like Order 66 with the stormtroopers. And he starts taking over countries or start battling, and to do what he has to do. And the GI Joes are basically like guerrilla fighters trying to fight him off because he's here in New York. He's having a parade in Times Square. I mean, you talk about a complete change with Cobra Commander. In addition, Destro's and Mars Industries, his company, he's not like the number 2 anymore. We always knew he was like a little back and forth with Cobra Commander. But here he's like a middle of the road guy. You're not sure which way he's going to rock, but pretty interesting. This is what they're going to be doing with the comic. So guys, what is your thought on this new the new reboot to Cobra Commander, other than Hasbro wants to sell more toys? Petey, I'm putting it to you, bro.
I think you got it. I think to sell more toys, maybe garner some more interest and try to say, oh, hey, something new's happened over here. Come check us out. But I mean, I don't know. I think G.I. Joe, especially with the amount of toys and such, amount of characters that they have, they always can kind of find something to do with them. I think right now they're on IDW doing some stuff. Where's this going to be on? Is it going to be a new comic book?
I thought it was IDW, right?
Okay, IDW is a new IDW comic book. Is it Larry Hama doing that?
Yeah, that's what I wasn't sure. But I mean, they had Larry Hama, but we all have seen Larry Hama in tons of conventions and stuff like that. But they're saying it was going to be G.I. Joe from IDW by Paul Allor, Chris Evenhuse, and Brittany Peer, and Neil UTK. And it's given the villains a whole new origin as well. So it's coming from IDW, and they have a whole new crew who seems to be writing it. Which is, I mean, it's a definite new approach. I don't know if they're going to stop the titles that Hama has been helming for quite a while. Especially the Snake Eyes that have been coming out again. What's your take on all this, guys? What about you, the Cal?
It just sounds like typical Hollywood. Like, okay, let's try to reinvent the wheel with something that works. Cobra Commando's origin is a good origin. This is a typical guy who has a typical job and who will probably end up being not even a footnote in history. He would have probably lived, died, and nothing the wiser. And then one traumatic incident in his life changes this guy from a used car salesman to the deadliest terrorist in the world. And not only that, but also sets the paths of some of the Joes as well. And what they've done, and not very cleverly, is decided, hey, why don't we just turn this on its ear? Let's make Cobra Commander, the Joe team, sanctioned by the government, all of that stuff, and let's make the G.I. Joe team the terrorists. Let's make them underground, they're fighting again. And that was never what was supposed to happen. G.I. Joe is supposed to be preventing these guys, these terrorists, from upsetting, or demolishing these institutions that, these societies that have been set up all over the world, trying to really keep these guys from, turning it into something that, regular people would not want to see. Here, it's the opposite. G.I. Joe is doing what now? They're going to try to change this back from what the people want. If Cobra Commander is in charge and having a parade, then that's what the people want. The whole idea of, we're going to expose them. We've already been shown in real time that you could show Cobra Commander is a terrorist and doing all of this stuff, and the people would embrace him all the more. So I'm really not too sure what this is a typical Hollywood move. We got nothing else. We don't really think we have any stories. Hey, why don't we just change this around? Make black white, make night day, and see if we can sell that. it usually typically it also doesn't tend to sell pretty well because it's not the reason why this sort of story was successful in the first place. G.I. Joe is successful because they're trying to preserve society. They're trying to preserve institutions. They're trying to protect people's way of life by stopping Cobra from carrying out one of their sinister terrorist plots. And that works. This right over here, no. This is a totally different thing. Nothing comes to mind, but this is not, I know the story of, it's more like, what was that series that was on, came out some years ago? Oh yeah, V, where they had the aliens coming and they were reptiles in, they were reptiles, but people thought they were human, and so you had the resistance fighting against them. That's V at the end of the day. When you do that.
Well, I mean, that's when they start putting in this Serpanto, the Cobra law and stuff like that. But, they did, when I was looking up, that they did have a corporate face. Remember the two twins, Tomax and...
Zamar. Tomax and Zamar.
Zamar, exactly. And they were like the good face of Cobra, They were running the businesses and, they had their psychic connection or whatever. So it's not like totally outlet wasn't doing it. And then you have Destro was also running his own business. I think now they just decided in 2020, this is much more than before. But again, if they're taking over the world with their androids and GI Joes like a guerrilla force, that's it kind of reminds me of this. If you read books right now, there's this whole thing called dystopian fantasy, dystopian literature right now, particularly with the world reboot where the good guys have to come back and reclaim civilization or something along those lines. I haven't seen this. I haven't read the comics, so I can't tell 100%. But it seems that's the tack they're trying to take. GI Joe is a shining light. They're going to build their forces and try and do something to make a difference. But hey, I say give it a chance to take a look at it. I'm always the guy to say let's give it a chance. Let's see what's going on. Like I did not like the whole Cobra Law turn and Serpanto turn with the Cobra, but let's give it a shot and see what goes on.
Well, I'll only add that it was interesting in the 80s in the G.I. Joe comic where they had Serpentor and they had someone who came up in the ranks within Cobra named Fred, and the Baroness kind of groomed him since the Cobra Commander was kind of gone.
Right.
She groomed him to become Cobra Commander. That's when he had like the armor on. He had the armor outfit. And it was like, so Serpentor was nuts. And obviously Destro has his own plans. But the Baroness was kind of groomed this guy, and he kind of was more sensible than any of those other guys. So it was an interesting take having this guy come to rank. It's something I would really hate, but it was way Hama had played it. It was pretty interesting seeing how this guy was a little more saner than obviously, Cobra Commander was a little less to himself, kind of saw everything, whereas Serpentor never really amounted to much, even though they had the grand comic idea of putting all the crazy world leaders, and just got someone that was totally, absolutely terrible. Like there was no good at anything. So it was interesting that now we have a new Cobra Commander who probably will be, well, that was sort of the interesting part, was whether or not Cobra Commander was actually, he was not really good at his job, but he had this large force and he was a fun character. And that's something you kind of lose when you make him sort of the guy, make him like the Batman v Superman, Lex Luthor type of guy or something like that. So you lose something in that sort of trade. So anyway.
Well, let's go back to this real quick. I mean, I like your points that you were making there, but also wasn't this, I mean, you said they're IDW, but wasn't this was originally a Marvel comic, wasn't it? When it first came out.
Well, DC, well, no, I'm sorry. You're dealing with Cobra Commander, all those characters, Cobra Commander, Snake Eyes, the Baroness, Scarlet, Duke, that's Marvel. Mm-hmm. That's Marvel. This would be the third G.I. Joe series in comics, if I remember correctly, and the third, I think this would be the second major toy line that would go for G.I. Joe. Mm-hmm. And of course, we remember that, they came up with the toys first. And then the comic books, they got sued over this. The comic books, the cartoons we're all supposed to be in support of the toys. Like, hey, you love these cartoons? Go out there and buy those toys, kids. You know, go get those toys. But the thing with G.I. Joe, which was very different, you have to thank Larry Hama for this, was that Larry Hama was the singular driving force on G.I. Joe while they were at Marvel, but also on the toys. If you read any of the backstory, like on the back of each toy, you would have a bio for each of the Joes. Larry Hama wrote all of them. Okay, he wrote all of them. Every single toy that you saw, be it from Snake Eyes down to Jinx, he wrote all of them. He had backstories for all of them, and told just about all of the stories for G.I. Joe in its first run at Marvel. I think it's only run at Marvel, to be if I'm correct. So it was just, that was the most popular. That without a doubt, that's the most popular, the most well known, and the one that everybody remembers. He just did a really good. I mean, he just did a really good job with it. Even when the cartoon started descending into stuff of Flights of Fancy with Cobra La, which made no sense whatsoever. Even though I enjoyed that one, but
did not.
Even though I enjoyed that one, he was a singular driving force behind it. But it was also because the character. I mean, he really did some stuff with the characterization of what would have just been toys. You know, what would have just been toys. And most of the time, you know, as a kid, you get the toy, you get a little backstory, and you pretty much create everything else. In the comic, he was really building that stuff with some really deep backstories that would not necessarily happen for characters like this, even in the comics. And G.I. Joe had a run of well over 100 issues. So, you know, that's something, you know, that is something to keep it. That's something to keep in mind when people decide, well, you know, let's tweak this a bit. You know, or let's throw a fresh coat of paint on it, and the fresh coat of paint is, you know, as drab as possible.
Yeah. I think just to add on it with the Marvel stuff, you have to also look at it and say the success of the Marvel comic was you have Larry Hama on it, who is known for, you know, editor, this sort of like known for doing sort of like current day war comics with, I guess, editing the NAM and whatnot. But this is not like the Marvel sort of say this is going to be a success. They had like Ham on it because he knew a lot about Army stuff. And they had Herb Trimpe on it, who likes to draw planes. He's obviously a big Hulk artist, and the thing just worked. You know, and Hama was a long-standing artist on that title. And at the same time, but I guess they moved Herb Trimpe off of it, but I think they allowed him to write one of the issues, I think issue 8. But the success of it is totally goes against what was at the time, being like having people like Byrne, having Miller, George Perez, like these guys, you know, Walter Simonson getting big. But then at the same time, you had Micronauts, but you also have Michael Golden on it. Micronauts continued the success after Golden, but then you had this that didn't have these comic names that were there. It was just saying, oh, this sort of story. And then the testament to say not just number 1, issue 2 was sold out. So it's just like, oh, sweat, we under ordered issue 2, and now that's a collector's item, that sort of thing. So it's interesting. Then you get Michael Golden coming in and doing a couple of the annuals, that sort of thing. And just a long-standing comic book, which of course it sort of ran out. I guess you can say because it was at Dark Horse for a hot second. I don't think anyone remembers that. But then Devil's Due kind of got a little steam under it. And then now obviously IDW has some steam under their G.I. Joe, bringing Larry Hama back to it. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. But then I think IDW has so much Joe stuff, where they had, they have special missions. They have Hama doing stuff. They got Rob Liefeld doing stuff now with Snake Eyes. And Rob Liefeld's brought back the 70s G.I. Joe with the monster, the bionic G.I. Joe, that sort of stuff, that they actually had a Joe character. So it's, it's a property. It seems like they're doing a lot of different things. But that's what they kind of do, even though they haven't hit big success with all of their titles. They have kind of tried a lot of things. So I don't know. That kind of sounds kind of off for me, but it's, I guess I'm not the audience anyway. So let's see how it goes.
A question. I mean, I bought some recent Snake Eye comics.
You hated them.
No, I didn't. I thought one of them.
You didn't hate them?
I hated one of them, not all of them. But one question I had was that does Hama own does Hama own GI Joe? I mean, not GI Joe, or no? All the characters he's developed and created over the years.
No, that's all work for hire. He doesn't own them.
Unless they gave him a small percentage, it would only be like 4% if they gave him something. But it's highly unlikely.
He's intimately connected with that particular brand. You know, I mean, you have some artists who are just so intimately connected. And you think G.I. Joe, you think Hama.
Well, you have a situation where Hama's working for Marvel. So these characters are being licensed by Marvel, and Hama's working for Marvel pretty much as work for hire. He's not creating, he might have created some of the characters. You know, if I'm correct, he probably did create some of them, but it's all under that contract aspect. So, I don't know. He might be getting something.
Yeah.
Maybe.
After all these years, he has to. I mean, he's re-upped so many times. Yeah.
That's the thing, though. You don't have to get anything. These guys, you've got two different tracks going at you. One, normally when you come on, you work for the comic, it's work for hire. So unless they have something saying, well, look, you're going to get something for the characters that you create, new characters, you're not getting anything. And then these were licensed characters as well, which usually how it would work is that they would tell you, okay, we got these characters coming down. We got these characters coming down the pipe. We want one called Jinx. We want one called Shipwreck. We want one called Serpentor. And, you got the names to work with, and then you would develop everything else, based on those names. Because that's also that would also be part of the process. In Hama's case, he might have developed some of these characters whole cloth, but it becomes, it does become pretty difficult when you're working in terms of the license, because a lot of times these guys already have ideas of what they want to see, and then what you create, you send back to them, and they're like, no, we don't like that. Do it over. Come up with something else. We don't want Jinx to be this. We want Jinx to be, we didn't want Jinx to be a guy. We wanted Jinx to be a girl.
Right.
That type of stuff.
And
right.
The only thing I would add that's I think a side note is the Snake Eyes and the Deadpool sort of connection. Like a lot of the stuff having swords and that influence a lot of those covers. Whereas G.I. Joe at that point in the 90s wasn't a big seller for Marvel. Those sort of toys and those comics really had an influence on Rob Liefeld. You could see it in some of the covers redone, like some of the, I think I forget what the black character's name in there. There's some poses that, who's that guy? Cable is in the same position. So it's one of those things where you see this book has a lot of cool stuff and then kind of runs out of steam, but then you start seeing some of that stuff in these other Marvel comic books. And it's like, hey, wasn't that a Joe picture? Wasn't that who's the guy that on The Rock played? I can't remember his name. But yeah, it's one of those things where you see this sort of book and you're like, oh, it's licensed property. At some point, they forget the success that Marvel was like well over 150 issues of G.I. Joe. And same with like Star Wars and DC, Star Trek. DC really hit it, I guess not big, but they did decent and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and it's pretty interesting because you have, first of all, Hama is so uniquely qualified because he wasn't a military, right? Yeah. Besides that, he's I think he is a master, or he qualified in Japanese martial arts such as judo, Iaido. I think that's the art of the sword, and then he also knows archery, which plays all these different elements play into his the G.I. Joe comic. So it's like he's uniquely.
He also came up under the great artist
Shooter.
Under Wally Wood as one of his assistants. I think who's that? Greg Capullo said, because he wanted to be an artist, and then he's like, so Larry Hama said to Wally Wood, he said, when can I start drawing, like just doing regular drawings? Like, when you stop sucking, I'll tell you. But saying that sort of guy. So when you hear his critique, I think he critiqued Greg Capullo, who did Batman and X-Force. He was very tough on him, not in that way, because he has a very pronounced voice, sort of like George Takei. So he has that sort of thing, but he gives you the Marvel critique. The true Marvel critique is telling you that you're bad until you're good. So,
well, I mean, remember here, this thing with the comic is that he got G.I. Joe because no one else wanted it.
There's that too.
So good at that. So no one
There's
else
that
wanted
too.
it. He took it. And he took it for 155 issues. I mean, how many writers get that? That's how many years? That's what, 10 years worth of comics? Come on. You worked it out well, right?
Yeah. You got to sit around and get the, hand the toys and then be able to just, rename them. So it's like, it's your prop. It's kind of your property for the while he was doing it. So.
And Larry Hall worked from a full script.
Yeah, there's that too. But the other thing is that he also had Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane was like, there was a fill-in they had him do, and they said, don't let this guy anywhere near G.I. Joe again. So the hit.
Sorry. But Cal, it wasn't G.I. Joe's, when they first came out, one of the first original collectible toys?
The ones the
big tall ones?
Comic?
No, before the comic.
The old Joes? The
old Joes, yeah.
The large figures?
Well, they're all collectibles later.
Right. All right, yeah. But I'm just saying.
Nobody cared. I mean, if you were reading comics like in the 70s, they had these other Joes. I just remember this ad that they had in one of the comics where he was fighting this guy, and the guy had on like an over-the-shoulder, animal tunic or something of that nature. And I remember G.I. Joe was fighting this guy, and I remember looking to see that. I never saw the toy in the stores, and the reason I never saw the toy in the stores because that comic was like 10 years old, at that point. So the toy was like 10 years old. You couldn't find it in the store unless you were looking for some place that actually had those toys. It would have been an antique store, or older toy store along those lines. It would have been harder to find it. So those guys right now, those would be considered the even more vintage stuff. But the Joes, when they first came out, they were just, one, they were smaller. They were 3.5 inches. They were far, far more posable than any other toy that I had seen at that point. Literally a bunch of swivel, what did they call it? Swivel arm battle grip. Mm-hmm. As opposed to the kung fu grip. They were attached by like a stronger type of rubber band, so you could get a whole bunch of flexibility out of them. So it was just like really good toys. And then it went whole hog with a lot of this stuff where you had a toy for every character. You also had like the foot soldiers, so you could if you bought, like, we're willing to really go whole hog with that. Like how you used to have with those older, penny soldiers with the stand, you could just buy a bunch of those and you could create all of these battles. They had all the vehicles. They had the what is that? What is that in what is that thing the Intrepid is called again? It's not a hovercraft.
The aircraft carrier?
Yeah, they had an aircraft carrier. The Hiss drone, the Terror drone.
Yeah. You're right.
So that's where the difference really gets into it, because where the other toys for G.I. Joe was like, okay, we're going to produce a handful of figures. And a lot of times it was one figure that got produced and you could get different clothing for it and change it along those lines. G.I. Joe went whole hog and really trying to make that world that was coming out as physical as possible. The stuff that you were seeing in the cartoon, the stuff that you were reading in the comic, you could approximate all of that with the toys. So that's where you have a really big difference in terms of those two toy lines.
Yeah.
Trying to get a quick look for that ad, because I remember as a kid I wanted a whole comic book of those
Which one?
G.I. Joe.
Well, that's right. I forgot they had
the animal print.
I almost forgot they had ads for the comics. I remember that as well. That actually got me into them. I still remember, who was it? It was D who got the first issue of G.I. Joe, and it was a double-sized issue. I think it was like $1 or something. And so he was coming over like, hey, we got to check this out. And I think everybody was passing the book around like, wow, feel how heavy that is. You feel the weight? Feel the weight on the comic? Just some real kid stuff at the end of the day. But then I remember around G.I. Joe 14, they started doing ads. They started doing ads for G.I. Joe. I guess it was that popular. So there was one for like the introduction of Destro, and it was, like Destro came on the ad and he was like, I know how we'll take out the Joes. We'll do a night attack, a night attack, a night attack. And then, the cartoon for the cartoon commercial for the comic went on. They would introduce other guys like Zartan. And not only did they introduce the toy, but the comic at the same time, like read G.I. Joe 23 if you want to see the first appearance of Zartan.
Yep.
I forgot that portion. I forgot that portion of it as well. And here's the funny thing, G.I. Joe got that. They got they got the cartoons and the toys, and they had the comics, and you had the promotion through the commercials for both the toys and the comic. And you would be hard pressed to think of another comic book. Even Spider-Man, with all of his popularity, never got anything like that. Never got anything, not that he needed it. Spider-Man was pretty much going to sell, whether he got a commercial or not. But you never saw that type of promotion with another comic book, with like another type of property. And you don't see that type of promotion today. Like, hey, look at this, come over here. Hey, want to find out what happened? Go read Superman 26, kids. You don't see any promotion like that.
Good point. So, gents, any more thing before we wrap this up?
That's it, I think.
Yeah.
Postscript.
What's the postscript?
Just
Larry
to
Hama, what's the postscript?
fallback.
So, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. As you can see, we agree that this stuff is different, but we're interested in seeing more of it. So please.
We said that?
Yes, we did. So please give us a thumbs up, likes, comments, and hey, subscribe. Spinner Rack.
Out.
Out.